everyone. Welcome to another episode of Take a Look. My name's Dave McSporran,
My name's Felipe Escobar.
and joining us today on the show is a very special guest, Coach Mike Thompson, who won the 2019 Coach of the Year award for the Canadian Paralympic Program, and was named as a coach originally for the Canadian team heading to Tokyo in 2020 with our Paralympic swimming program. So welcome, Mike.
Thanks, guys. Appreciate it.
So thank you so much for taking the time. We'd scheduled this a couple days ago, and I think today's a pretty interesting day to be doing this interview of all days, especially.
I had no foreknowledge this was going to happen, by the way. This was all coincidence.
Yeah. With all the news that's been coming up with Canada not being able to, canceling, then Australia, then for sure the Olympics being postponed to 2021. So it actually worked out that we did it today, out of all days.
Yeah, lots to talk about.
Yeah.
So how did you get any word from that from Swimming Canada, or did you find out sort of through the news?
No, unfortunately, a lot of the things that happen through CPC and COC happen outside of our jurisdiction. So typically we don't find out until everyone else finds out. So we'll find out either by email about 15, 20 minutes before it actually, the statement's released. So we might get a pre-advice just before everyone else does, but most of the time we get it pretty well when everyone else does. The unfortunate thing is for the athletes, they hear everything basically as it gets media released, so the athletes don't have any pre-advice. So that's it's been a very, very tough couple of weeks for everybody because everyone keeps hearing new news. This changed and then this changed. The way it started for us is we were supposed to have we participated in the Ontario Provincial Championships beginning of March, and we came back expecting to participate in the Quebec Provincial Championships the week after. That ended up being canceled less than 24 hours before it was supposed to start.
Oh wow.
We came in, had to rebook time for training because trials were supposed to be in a couple of weeks. And then we found out as we arrived at the pool that everything was going to shut down for the foreseeable future. So we just kept getting information, and then there was a state of emergency, and then everything closed down, and then everyone's social distancing. And this all happened one day after the other, after the other, after the other. So it's been a really, really tough time for the athletes, and then we all have to be pretty accepting to change and roll with things right now because there's just so many changes that just keep happening.
For sure. So are you guys with your athletes that are part of your high performance center? Are they doing stuff at home right now, like trying to stay fit on certain maybe dryland programs that they can do from home from you guys, or?
Yeah, so what we've been doing is I've been connecting with my IST team, the team of specialists and that help us out with our season. So our strength conditioning coach, as well as our physio and our physiologist and myself have been meeting to come up with individualized programs for everybody. In a para program, not everyone can do everything, so it doesn't make sense to put a blanket program in. We have about 8 or 9 different programs floating around right now. And part of it's for strength and part of it's for cardio. And a lot of our guys don't actually live in Quebec, so some of them have gone home because we were worried that eventually it would become more and more difficult for them to reach the West Coast. So we have 2 athletes that are from BC, 1 from Calgary, and a few from Ontario. So we've sent them if they wanted to be with their families and had more access to strength equipment or treadmills or bikes or anything like that at home. It made more sense for them to be at home. So some of them have gone, but we're all really close. We've been meeting twice a week by either Zoom or Facebook Messenger or something like that. And we've been having Swimming Canada has been having meetings with us almost every day, almost every 2 days, because there are so many changes that keep happening that change the current plan that we just put in place yesterday is now no longer valid. So now we got to change that again. And just constantly meeting with different members of the IST team, checking in with the athletes, seeing how they're dealing with things. And our psychologist has been just very, very busy lately because everyone's trying to make sure that they're mentally healthy and taking care of themselves and still trying to stay motivated.
So now that it's been postponed, let's say for 2021, what kind of changes your training routine with your athletes to get them ready for next year and having that 5-year span from last Olympics?
It's a tough question to answer because the IOC and the IOC and the IPC statement only says that it's going to be held after 2020, but sometime before the summer of 2021.
Oh, wow.
We don't actually we don't actually know when it's going to be, which becomes kind of difficult. So as of right now, the state of emergency here in Quebec, I believe, is supposed to last for another 3 weeks. So we know we're not going to have pool time until then, which makes it very difficult to go and plan for any sort of meets or competitions that are going to happen. So I think what we're going to end up doing when we're able to get back into the pool is basically train through the summer if we can. Take a small break in September so people can start focusing on university. We have a couple people moving into the center next year that are going to be at universities here in Montreal. So they're going to need to get their bearings straight, figure out their schedule and that, and then we'll jump into full training earlier in September, which is much, much, much different than the plan was going to be next year, because we were going to be done early September and take a month and a half off at that point. So obviously things have changed a little bit in our timeline.
Yeah, the month and a half is now this month right now. That's their break.
Exactly. And I think, just if I can speak to this quickly, the big thing for our athletes, we had given them 10 days off after trials. It was either going to be a big celebration for making the team, or it was going to be a time to, just kind of relax and kind of get your thoughts together if you didn't manage to make it. So knowing that these guys had already planned to have 10 days off right off the bat, we weren't in any particular rush to have to do anything. We were just moving their time off from after trials to now. So we had planned to have some time off at that period, so it wasn't really that difficult for us. We had a little bit of time to play with, and everyone seems to be, even before we gave them programs, people were just trying to, determined to be in the best shape of their life when they came back, regardless of what was going on. So it's been interesting, but it's also like these guys have been really, really, really professional about it. So it makes my job a little bit easier.
Oh, for sure.
For sure, it would be.
So you began working with the center in is 2015, is that correct?
Yeah, I was hired in August of 2015. It was the time, I think I was hired during World Championships in 2015, and I think it was announced just after we returned, the time between World Championships and Pan Ams, I believe.
Okay, yes, and then you've seen some huge success, obviously coached on some big teams, a couple of World Championship teams, coached at Rio, Commonwealth. So what was that transition like coming from club swimming with lots of young high school students and all that, and moving now to this working with international level athletes and like Olympic caliber and all that stuff? So
it was really cool. I mean, one of the things that I was looking for in the club system, and one of the things that drew me to this job, was the fact that it was high performance. So I didn't want the distraction of parents. I didn't want the distraction of club excuses, or I didn't want distractions of like a municipality saying you can't have so much pool time. I just wanted to be in a place where everything was focused on being the best in the world, and there are never any excuses, and the only excuses that can come up with are my excuses for not performing, right? So I didn't want to be in a position where I had to ever come up with an excuse, but I did want to be in a position where I was given the support that I needed to do what I felt that I could really do. So when I was hired in 2015, we were put parallel with the Olympic size intensive training program, it was called at the time, which is basically a next-gen center. So Tom Rushton was on the Olympic program, I was on the Paralympic program, and we both had fairly small groups. And quite honestly, with me joining in September of 2015 in a Paralympic year, we really didn't expect me to have much work. We kind of expected that I would be an assistant for Tom, and I would do some small clinics and do some outreach work. What we didn't count on was that Benoit Huot would jump on full steam and put his trust in me that I could do the job for him. And quite honestly, everything we have right now, I owe to Ben, because Ben really put himself out on a limb and put his trust in me that we could get him another medal, which is what he wanted to do. So, all respect to him. Love you, Ben. I know you're watching. So I'm really, really, really pleased that he was able to do that, because he brought a couple of other athletes with him. And once people started to see Ben knock down some best times and other people making best times, and Isaac Boakley was another athlete that I don't think that was very expected to make the team, but had a performance of a lifetime at the first day, I think, of trials, or second day, where he made the team and everyone was ecstatic, and I think that really helps, because people are starting to see the performances around and then saying, well, maybe there's something here. And we went into the summer of Rio with all three of those boys, plus a couple of the people that came in to work with us part-time making the team. We had pretty good success in Rio. It was a tough meet. The transition to going to a 10-day meet and the amount of emotion and craziness there was a lot, a lot. Do not recommend anyone doing that without having any kind of background. It is very, very, very tough. But while we were there, the athletes that I had worked with for a couple of years became pretty good prospects and recruits that they wanted to go to universities that were in Montreal anyway. So they decided to make a move. So we ended up with a core group of James LaRue, who just won a medal this past summer, World Championships in the 100 breaststroke. Tess Rutliff, who won a medal in Rio and won a few medals this past summer. Danielle Kisser, who was a prospect that came off of surgery a few years ago and was still working her way back. We've got Zach Zona, who was on the World Championships team and just missed Rio. And I'm missing somebody in that list. Nope, because the 5th place was people that were rotating through. So that's our core group that we've had since 2015. And every year we've had 1 or 2 people join, and one person might leave because they changed schools or it wasn't for them, or injury or retirement. Jean-Michel Lavier was the other person that stuck around, by the way. Sorry. And so we've had some people come in and come out. In 2018, Orly Rivard jumped in, and that really forced me into a spotlight that allowed me to do certain things and forced me to do certain things and change the way that I was coaching. The change and the transition that you're asking, this is a long answer to a short question, but the change and the transition, I think, came a lot around understanding how to coach to an individual as opposed to how to coach to a group. I think that if you have 30 people, like when I was coaching Felipe in Halton Hills, we had a group of 28 people in the senior group, and a lot of the practices were geared towards generalities of 28 people, which meant that everyone got better, but nobody particularly got as good as they could possibly get. Right? I think that there's sorry, bud. I know that that's not what you want to hear, but
wide range too. Like I was at that time I wasn't even close making central regions, but then we had Kyle Haas at the same time that was like at a really high level at the time, and so like it was just a huge range of people on the 28 people.
Well, I think when anyone's coaching in a group like that, I think you have to coach to the group as opposed to coach to an individual, because you run the danger of coaching to an individual and losing the rest of the group and no one really caring, or you coach to the rest of the group and lose the person at the top that doesn't feel like they're being catered to. So that's one thing that's very tough to do. Now, I have a group right now I had 9, now 8 athletes that are all different calibers, different shapes, different sizes, different abilities. And that becomes really hard now because I have to give each individual person the most attention that they can have and the best attention that they possibly can have. So a lot of the times when I'm running practices, when I'm running it for a group, I might have 3 alterations, sprinters, mid-distance, or backstrokers, breaststrokers, whatever it happens to be. In this case, in a lot of cases, I'm writing 6, 7, 8 workouts every time there's a workout, because there's a bunch of different things to take into consideration. Somebody can't use the left side of their body. Someone takes 67 strokes per long course 50 as opposed to the 26 some other people are taking. So sometimes they're doing double the damage on their shoulders as opposed to everyone else. There's a lot of things to think about. Some people don't. Some of the people with neurological disorders do not recover from intensity work as fast as everybody else, so they can't be on the same cycle as everyone else. There's a lot of things to take into consideration when you're working with these athletes, but that's what's fun about it for me. It's work, but it does make you think a lot. It makes you keep a lot of things. You juggle a lot of balls, but I think it does make me a better coach having to think about that. Rather than, I can never just show up and go through the motions. I always have to put a lot of thought into what I'm doing. And I think that makes me a better coach. So the transition was tough, but what I've learned from being able to do that, it makes me a lot more patient. It makes me a lot better at dealing with a situation like this, where I don't know what's going to happen next week, right? I'm a lot better at dealing with those situations now than I would have been dealing as a club coach, I think.
Yeah, you partly answered my next question there too, which was if you could speak a bit about the different coaching approaches that you have to take to a wide range of classifications, right, that you see in para swimming. And
we typically have, like, our group is a little bit strange. We have so for anyone that doesn't know very much about para swimming, there's 10 different classifications that cover physical impairment. So S1 would be the most impaired, and S10 being the least impaired. There is S11, 12, and 13, which are visual impairments. So S11 being totally blind, and 13 being largely impaired, and 12 being in the middle. and then 14 would be an intellectual impairment. So we have we have people spanning all over the place. We have 3 different people that are short in stature, and that comes with its own challenges, just because you always have to look up, right? So a lot of them have shoulder problems because they're always looking up, or they can't reach a sink, so they have to reach their shoulders a lot higher. We have one that just has very, very weak hands because that's the way their skeleton developed. They don't have very much muscle in the hand. So we got to take into consideration that. We have a boy who has autism and epilepsy, which you have to monitor and control, because when he gets too tired, he tends to seize, and if he gets overstimulated, he tends to seize. So you have to keep things right in the middle, and monitoring that becomes difficult. We have 2 athletes that are only SB9s, so they're only eligible to swim breaststroke. And there are a number of problems with that. One is that they both have very weak knees and hips. One of them is due to cerebral palsy, which means that they do not recover from intensity very well, and they tend to get into a hole of being tired very quickly. And another one that has a skeletal problem, which means their hips and their knees don't operate properly, and they get very, very sore because they're missing muscle tone in that area. So not only do you have to monitor how much breaststroke they can actually do in training so that you don't kill them, but also when you go to a competition, they're only eligible to swim one event. So if it's a 5-day competition and the event happens to be on, day 5 or day 4, you got to make sure that you're not tapering them for too long, and you got to make sure that they come off and they perform in the right way, and they don't get demotivated if their first event is or their only event's on the first day. And then we have another person that's kind of in the middle of a classification. She's an S8, but she's not at the top of the class. She's not at the bottom of the class, and she's neurological, and she's a sprinter. So what I said is they don't recover very well from intensity. So how much intensity can you do with a sprinter and not have them go into a hole? And also, she's in the middle of that classification period. She's in the middle of the classification. She's not almost a 7, and she's not almost a 9. She's right stab in the middle. So she needs to get better. She can't glide by on anything. So things become very interesting when you consider the ramifications of how you train somebody. What I started to do when we had this new crew, and I didn't know very much about them, our classification lead, Janet Dunn, has been very, really helpful in my education of what needs to happen and how these impairments impair their daily lives and how they recover and how they train. But I made a number of mistakes in the first year, and one of the biggest mistakes I made was I tried to allow things to roll through differently than I would now. So what I mean by that is, when Benoit Huot joined us, Ben was 32 years old, and I was probably 36. So we were almost the same age. He had been around this way longer than I had, and he knew pretty well what he needed to do. So if there was something that needed to be done, he would have spoken up and said, I think this needs to be different, or I'd like to do this differently, or this needs to change, or whatever. And then I had 2 other athletes that were very similar. They were adults, they're in their 20s. They were going to tell me if something wasn't the way that they expected it to be, or the way that it should be. So I expected, when I had this new group of younger athletes, not young, I think they were 19, 18, that things were going to be more or less the same way. And that's not what happened. They allowed me to give them things that they weren't really clear on, because their background was, well, if I'm given something from my coach, I got to do it. And so I think the first half of the year we spent way too much time being nice to each other. The athletes were too nice to say anything, and I was too nice to, to intervene and say, I don't know if this is going to work. I really felt like my job was to be solid and, to show them that this was the way, and no one ever deferred from it. So I think it was, we had a really, I wouldn't say unsuccessful trials in 2017, but it wasn't where we wanted it to be. We had 4 or 5 people make the team, I think 4 out of 7. And the people that didn't were extremely upset and not happy about that at all. We had a sit-down meeting afterwards, where they really, at that point, decided that they missed their opportunity to tell me what they needed. We had a good talk with the group, and that's, I think, how we built the most trust that we have, is that those guys really now trust that they know they can say something when something needs to be said. They know that I'm going to say something when something needs to be said. And we know each other a lot better at this point, so we can actually have a family-like environment. It's been 4 years now, so we know each other very, very well at this point.
Sorry to interrupt. Do you think that stemmed from their time maybe with club swimming, when they weren't maybe some were not in just a specific para swimming training program?
Yeah, I expect that exactly. I mean, a lot of the athletes in this country that work under club programs, and this isn't a slam against anybody. I want to be very clear about that.
Yeah.
But it's just the logistics of any program. If you're an athlete that swims in a group with 25 people in the water and there are 6 lanes, and you're not as fast as everybody else and you're consistently getting past, it's not easy for you, and you end up cutting out what you need to cut out. So there's no actual program in place. They tell you to do 60% of something or 70% of something.
Right.
So if it's 1050s, you'll do 650s, or if it's 1050s, you'll do 7. You won't be with anybody. You'll just kind of do them, and you'll hopefully be done around the same time, maybe a little bit earlier. But you are not in a position where you can really complain or say anything or speak up, because what else are you going to do? In this situation where we have 5 lanes, 5 long course lanes for 8 people, we have enough space. You're doing your workout. Regardless of whether or not it impedes with anybody else. We have people sometimes that are done in an hour, and some people that are done in 90 to 100 minutes. So some people are done way before other people, but that doesn't necessarily mean that someone's working harder than somebody else. They just happen to be in a different part of their cycle. And I still find that there's some resistance to that, not in this group, but people that come in and see it, they don't fully understand why that's important, but they don't fully understand what we're doing. And I mean, I get that. It doesn't necessarily apply to a club system because it doesn't cross over very well. But in a 60 minutes of time, sometimes these guys can work harder than they can in an hour. It's just a matter of they've gotten the work done in 1 hour, and there's nothing else for them to do. I can have them swim longer, but why?
Well, and it's individual, right? It's tailored to the need of that swimmer, right?
Yeah.
Sorry, my next question was, do you guys run? Because this has been very informative for us, right? We're learning a lot, and do you guys run like talks or web seminars or anything to educate other coaches around the country about approaches to training para swimmers? That if someone comes to your club and you have a group of 20 swimmers that are not under a para classification, and then all of a sudden someone that is a para swimmer joins the club, how would they sort of deal with that? Do you guys run those sort of talks or things?
I don't usually. What we do at Can-Ams or national meets, we typically have a coach's education session where I think I've done 2 presentations in those. My assistant, Mike Eady's done one of them, and Vince McCusker, our head coach, and Wayne Lomas, our associate high performance director, will typically do informational sessions about the quad, what to expect, because I think everybody at some point is like, their eyes are open, and everyone has an Olympic dream, right? Same thing. Everyone's got a Paralympic dream. And I don't think that everyone fully understands how difficult it is to actually make it through that pathway. And I also don't think that people really understand what they have to do to qualify for things. So I think that's our priority right now, or that has been our priority in the last few years, is just trying to put things into perspective for people. When you're 14 years old, it's pretty unlikely that you're going to make the Olympic team. It's just as unlikely that you're going to make the Paralympic team. It's a pretty deep team, and in order for Canada to actually get slots to send people to the Paralympics, they have to have top 16 in the world performances between January to September of that performance year. So for example, I think we ended up with 19 spots. Canada ended up with 19 spots, which means that we had that many people performing in the top 16 in the world, and I believe most of those were in the top 12. Now, given the fact that most athletes in Canada don't fall within the top 20, it's very, very difficult to actually earn a spot and be able to contribute. So I think we've done a really good job of educating that. I'm hoping in the next quad we're going to be able to, take a look at how do we get more people performing in that top 16 window and get us more slots so we can send a bigger team. Love to send a bigger team. It would be great. I think we sent 25 people in 2016 and only 19 this time.
They've also done those camps, and I think you're maybe part of one at the Pan Am Pool in Scarborough. And they used to do a lot of it because Chris, the head coach after you left, he had a para swimmer that would go to those camps as well. And that was kind of the same thing, just to have a training facility for all the para swimmers that got together, and they would do the same thing for non-para swimmers as well.
Yeah, so there's 2 things that you're talking about, I think. There's the Ontario Academy that runs sessions bi-weekly, I believe, or 2 or 3 times a week there, where the athletes can drop in to get some help through that. So the academy does one. Then every province does their own provincial camps where they mostly do skill work. I think. I don't think they talk very much about the infrastructure around how to make a team or where it goes from there or any sort of classification questions. I don't think they do very much of that in the provincial camps. I think the provincial camps are more about looking through to see who's available for Canada Games and who's available to represent the province, I guess, when they go forward to national teams. So we do camps throughout the year. We do one in September, which is our startup camp where we invite the highest ranking athletes into, usually here at the INS, where we're able to test and go through some talks and show them how that progression works, kind of go through the plan of what their plan should look like for the next 4 years. So we do a little bit of that. Most of what I do is based on high performance, so we don't deal with too many next gen athletes. Now, having said that, we do have a next gen program here at the INS that's run mostly by Mike Eady, but I personally don't handle a lot of the next gen planning or programming.
How many of those next gen sort of programs are out there, right? Because or even similar centers to your own, because you guys are like the full high performance training center, and then you were previously a next gen center. So how many of those are actually around? Just out of interest.
You know what? I don't think I know the answer to that question. There's the academy in Ontario underneath Ben, coached by Don Burton, which is a next gen center or a next gen academy, and I believe there's one out in Victoria. Not sure about BC. I think those are mostly provincial jurisdiction because I don't think Swimming Canada has anything to do with those. But I'm not 100% sure on that. I'm not sure if I can answer that question.
Oh, that's all good. I was just curious because we brought it up earlier. All right, I think that's all the time that we have. Thank you so much, Mike, for taking the time to speak with us. And
no problem, guys. Listen, let me tell you this. Let me say this while everyone's still watching before you cut me off. I coached these two guys years ago, not at the same time. I coached Dave in Oakville, and I coached Phil in Halton Hills. Phil sent me like the nicest note, I think, just after I had left Halton Hills when he had left and moved somewhere else. I think the Whitby maybe.
Yeah,
sent me a really nice note. And Phil, honestly, that made my day, and I go back and read that every so often from time to time. It really makes me feel like no matter what I achieve in this job, in this program, nothing's made me feel better than working with athletes that I brought through somewhere. And Dave, same thing, man. Like working with you in Oakville for that limited time. I was only there for a year, but looking back on a lot of the stuff that you had sent me, and I think I tagged you in a couple posts this year when I was going through some of my old stuff here, just around the senior sprint program there.
Well,
those are the things. No matter what I achieve here, I think those are the moments that I look back on. And I'm like, man, coaching is a good life. Coaching is a great life, and I don't know if you guys are interested in it, but hopefully you get to experience something like that sometime.
Well, actually, one of my scariest ones when I was little that I actually got yelled at by you was when I missed warm up, and then I missed the swim that same session, and then we come on Saturday, and in front of everybody, Mike just goes like, "Felipe, you missed another one?" And you're up for the swimming, and I was like little, and I was so scared. But no, it's been great, and like you've been so good as a coach, and you can see it by the awards and by everything that you've done. So no,
thanks, man.
And I need to take the opportunity to thank you as well, because you were the coach actually that pushed me. You said it so matter of factly. I remember when you discovered my Jamaican heritage, you're like, let's get this ball rolling. Like, let's see if we can get you citizenship, the whole thing, and get involved with Jamaican swimming down there. So we went ahead and did that, and that was thanks to you and your impact as a coach. So thank you. I'm very happy to see just how far you've come, yourself as a coach, and then building and growing this program that I know will be super successful whenever Tokyo shows up.
Thanks a lot, guys. I appreciate it. And I'm honored that you'd have me on the show. I really am. So thanks very much.
No problem.
All right. Thanks,
you.
everyone. That was Mike Thompson on another episode of Take a Look, and we will see you next time. Thank you, Mike.
See you guys.